Okay, welcome back. And so this will be our last meeting because next week is finals week, which is a take-home finals week. But I guess this is our last WebEx meeting. So let's see where we're at. We just got to kind of get prepared for the final exam. That's today's agenda. All right. So we have I prepared a practice exam, and so we'll go through that for the final. And then when we get through that, and we'll see if we have any questions. And then once we're done with the review, I'll post your take-home final exam, which will be due in a week, next Wednesday during finals week. And then I also have another extra credit set of problems that we'll get to in a little bit. So the last homework chapter 15 is due today or tonight. And so it looks like only maybe one of you has turned in. Is everyone okay on turning in homework chapter 15? And any questions on that assignment that's due today? Okay. All right. Well, just make sure you get your chapter 15 homework in, and let me know if you have any questions on that. But yeah, so let's get right into the review for the final. Okay, so we finished. So the final is going to be on all the macroeconomic stuff that we've learned since post midterm 2. So essentially, the key terms and the key problems from chapters 10 through 15 that we covered in the last 4 weeks or so. So today we're going to go through a practice exam, then I'll post your exam, and we'll talk about some more extra credit. All right, and so let's go ahead and go to that. All right, so if you go to final exam, fall 2020, you'll see that I've got some new documents here. And so we'll go through this stuff, the practice, and then I'll post your final exam here. And that'll be due via email, and I'll post through, and we'll talk about some other extra credit problems as well that I'll post here. All right, so this is the practice exam. Let me just open up the PDF, and then we'll go through the solutions and go through the practice problems. Okay, so here's the practice one that we're going to go through in a minute, and your exam is going to be similar. You're going to have 5 questions, and I tried to pick kind of 5 things or 5 main problems that we've covered that I thought were important in chapters 10 through 15 on the macroeconomics material. So you're going to have number one on your exam is going to be using a price index to calculate real GDP. So you're going to make a little index and convert a simple nominal GDP to real GDP like we did in chapter 10, I think. Okay, number 2 will be on economic growth, and you'll calculate some growth rates, some simple growth rates, and then some per capitas, and then growth rate of the per capitas. All right, so we did that in chapter 10 or 11. Number 3 will be on the aggregate demand and aggregate supply graph. So we'll have an initial position, and then we'll have a couple shifts, and you just have to determine what happens to the new graph or the new equilibrium price level and GDP when the shifts in the AS or AD curve occur. So we'll do that one. Okay, number 4 is on the spending multiplier. All right, and so we had a bunch of examples like this, I think in the chapter 13 homework or something like that. And so we've had a bunch of practice with these, and most of you did the homework for this one, and almost everyone that did the homework got it 100% correct. So I was impressed that you're doing this homework. So I think we'll be good on this one. But here you're going to determine how much government spending has to rise to hit a target GDP, and then with taxes, and then we'll do a blended plan where you calculate the fiscal policy with both government spending and tax cuts, right? All right, and then number 5 is the final one on monetary policy. So we'll calculate excess reserves, we'll calculate the money multiplier, we'll determine the possible amount of new money creation, and then we'll do it again, changing the reserve ratio. So we did that, I believe, in chapter 14. All right, then I added the last part of part 5, part E, is something I added a couple questions that are semi-relevant to current events. And so this one here is in response to the most recent recession in 2007, 2009, and then I have one in your final exam, which is very similar, in a little example of what a special thing or not special thing, but something different the Federal Reserve has done for policy in the most recent crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic and the current recession we're likely in. So yeah. Okay, so let's go through the practice exam. There's 5 questions, and then I'll post your exam, which is again very similar to this, but different problems. All right, let's pull up. So here's the practice exam. There's a Word and PDF. I think. Let me just pull up the practice exam final fall 2020 solutions, and we'll go through those so we understand this. Okay, so let's go through the practice exam. So here we go. Number 1 is on using just calculating a simple price index and converting nominal GDP to real GDP. So we did something like this in chapter 10 in one of the homework questions or the exercises. All right, so assume a single good economy where the only production good here is smartphones. Let's refer to the table below for the measurement year and the corresponding units of output, which are quantity, and then the nominal price of smartphones, which is price. So the base year, you're going to put everything in $2010. And so all you have to do is determine the price index, which will be part A, nominal GDP, which is part B, and then convert the nominal GDPs to real GDP for part C. Okay, so in this example, you have data for 2010, 2015, and 2020. But the goal here is to put them all on the same scale. So you're going to put them all where it says base year. You're going to put them all in your 2010 terms. So you're going to convert real GDP. You're going to calculate real GDP in 2010 prices. Okay, so that way they'll all be in real terms. You can make more accurate comparisons. Okay, so this is a nice simple example to show how you do that and how to convert from nominal to real GDP. All right, so we got, let's see. Okay, so this is given, this part. All right, so you're given the year, the quantity, and the price. Okay, then you have to calculate here, and then for your exam, the price index, the nominal GDP, and then real GDP, right? Okay, so year 2010, there was 100 smartphones, and they were priced at $200. In year 2015, there was 500 smartphones, and the market price was $500. Okay, and then in 2020, there was 1,000 smartphones, and the price was $1,000. So this is hypothetical, but this is is if anyone had, I can't remember when the first iPhones were publicly available, but it was somewhere around like, I don't know, 2007 or 2008 or something like that. So I don't know when you guys got your first smartphones, but when they first came out, they were a lot cheaper. Maybe they were even like $100 or even cheaper, but I can't remember exactly. And they started to increase over time, and now they're the probably average price of a smartphone is somewhere around $1,000. Okay, so that seems like what the average price for a new phone is, at least at the current time. But yeah, so I think when did I think I got mine? Maybe it was later. I don't know. I want to. It might have been a little bit later. I want to say that 2009 is when I got my first iPhone, but I can't recall exactly. But yeah, something like that. Does that sound when did that sound right? When did iPhones start? When did everybody have iPhones? Around then or earlier or before? Yeah, I think that's about right. Yeah, so I think that replaced the Razor. We had the Razor. Yeah. If anybody had that, you're missing out. Okay, so what we're gonna do here is just there's one good, and the single good determines the GDP. So we got uh, year 2010. So first, you just want to get the price index. A What's the brick? Oh, is that a type of phone? Yeah. Okay. So so first part A, you want to get the price index. So to get the price index, you want to divide all the prices by the base year price, and then by default, the base year price index is going to be one. Okay, so the problem says that the base year is 2010. So to get the price index for each year, just divide all the nominal prices by the base year price. Okay, so 2010 is the base year, which means we're going to divide all the prices by 200 to get the index for that year. All right. So for this one, this is the base year. So 200 divided by 200 is 1. So you should always get the price index for the base year one is it comes out to 1. So that's right because this is the base year. And the other ones are going to be different because they're not the base year. So to calculate the price index for 2015, take this price from that year and divide it by the base year price. So that's 500 divided by 200. So the price index for 2015 is 2.5. Okay, and then to get the price index for year 2020, just take that year's price and divide it by the base year price. So 1,000 divided by the base year price gives us an index here of 5. So the base year is always going to have a price index of 1. The price index for 2015 is 2.5, and the price index for 2020 is 5. So we'll need those price indices later to convert nominal to real GDP. Okay, so nominal GDP is pretty easy. Just it's only one good, and there you have the price of the good. So GDP is just the price of that good times how much is produced. So if we're assuming this is all of GDP, in the simple example, just multiply all the goods by their price. Okay, so basically just the base year price times the base year quantity. Okay, so 100 times 200 gives us a nominal GDP of 20,000 for 2010. All right, in 2015, there was 500 produced, and the price was 500. So 500 times 500 is 250,000. And in 2020, 1,000 were produced at 1,000 each. So this times this, 1,000 times 1,000 gives us a nominal GDP of $1 million. All right, so these are all the nominals, just that year's price times that year's quantity. Okay, and then to convert nominal GDP to real GDP, all you got to do is divide the nominal GDP by the price index. Okay, so you've already got those two things. So all you got to do is divide this by this. So 20,000 divided by 1 is 20,000, and that should be the case because the nominal GDP and the real GDP in the base year should be the same because you're putting it in that year's dollars. Okay, so if you're putting everything in 2010 dollars, then the nominal GDP is going to be the same as the real GDP. Okay, so you should get that your nominal and your real are the same for the base year. So they're both 20,000. So you're just dividing this by 1, which is obviously 20,000. Okay, but to get the other ones into nominal GDP or to real GDP, just divide the nominal GDP by the price index in that year. So 250,000 divided by that year's price index of 2.5 gives us a real GDP of 100,000. Now for year 2020, nominal GDP divided by the price index in that year, so 1 million divided by 5 gives us 200,000. Okay, so real GDP in 2010 prices was 20,000 in year 2010, 100,000 in year 2015, and 200,000 in year 2020. Okay, and you can see that these ones, the real price is lower because you're putting them in older prices, right? And so you could pick any base year to put them in, but you got to put them in the same base year to get them in real GDP. All right, so the problem will tell you which year to put them in, but that's kind of how you do it. So you should always check that your base year price index is 1, which is going to give you the same nominal and real GDP for the base year. And then for the other ones, calculate your price index by dividing that year's price by the price in the base year. And then to get real GDP, just divide the nominal GDP by that year's price index. Okay. So on your take-home exam, you'll be given some year, some quantity, and some prices, some data here, and you got to just calculate the price index, the nominal GDP, and real GDP for whatever year that the problem says the base year is. Okay. Any questions on this one? Everyone sees what to do here for the converting to real GDP? All right. Number 2 is going to be on economic growth. So let's go through a nice example of this one. So we did some of this, I want to say in the chapter 10 homework a few weeks ago. So suppose real GDP in the US was 18,000 billion in 2018 and 19,000 billion in 2019. Let's also assume that population in the US was 0.32 billion, and in 2018 it was 0.32 billion in 2019. Okay. So let's use this information, and part A is let's get the growth rate of real GDP from 2018 to 2019. So GDP grew from 18,000 billion to 19,000 billion, right? So what was the growth rate over that period? Okay, so all you gotta do here is calculate the change over the original. So it's real GDP in the 2019 minus real GDP in 2018 divided by real GDP in the original year 2018. Okay, so this is always the newer one, and this is the older one. Okay, so we got real GDP in 2019 was 19,000 billion minus for 2018 18,000 divided by 18,000. All right, so the difference, the change over the original, and that gives us in decimals about 0.0556. Convert that to percentages, just multiply by 100, and you get about 5.56%. So the growth rate of GDP from 2018 and 2019 here was about 5.56%. All right, B. So this one you're going to convert to per capita terms, and then you're going to then part C you'll do the per capita growth rate. Okay, so calculate GDP per capita in both 2018 and 2019, and they're big numbers, but I put them on the same scale so this conversion comes out easy. So that it says your GDP per capita answer should be whole numbers in the thousands. All right, so we know what GDP per capita is, just GDP per person, so just GDP divided by the population that year. So in 2018, all right, how to calculate GDP per capita is GDP 2018 divided by population in 2018. So GDP in 2018 was 18,000 billion, and it said population was 0.32 billion. So 18,000 billion divided by 0.32 billion. Okay, the billions cancel out, so it simplifies. So basically 18,000 divided by 0.32. I try to make it come out to even numbers, and this one should come out to exactly 56,250. So 56,250 per person. Okay, then do the same in 2019. So just take GDP 2019 divided by the population in 2019. So GDP in 2019 was 19,000 billion. And I think so. Dominic, I think your audio is on. Do you have a question?
Fucking yesterday?
Oh, Dominic, I think your audio is on. Oh, there you go. Okay. Okay. So let's see where we. So GDP in 2019, 19,000 billion divided by the population that was given for 2019, which is 0.32 billion. So 19,000 billion divided by 0.32 billion gives us, or exactly, because the billions cancel out to make it easy, 59,375. So that was GDP per capita in 2019. Okay, and so these are estimates, but the real the numbers were pretty similar to this in the actual data. So GDP per capita and GDP in billions were somewhere around these actual numbers. All right, and then part C, what was the growth rate of real GDP per capita from 2018 to 2019? So take Here's 2018. Here's 2019. So take the change, the difference over the original, and that's your growth rate. Okay, so basically real GDP per capita 2019 minus real GDP per capita 2018 divided by real GDP per capita 2018. So the change over the original, okay, newer value minus older value divided by older value. And this is for 2019, real GDP per capita was 59,375 and minus 2018 GDP per capita 56,250 divided by per capita in 2018 56,250. So we get 0.0556, which is multiplied by 100 in percent terms, 5.56%. So the growth rate of real GDP per capita was that. Okay, and you can notice here that this will not always be the case, but you should have seen that because we're controlling for population for parts B and C, but because the population, or in this example, the population didn't change, 0.32 and 0.32, then the growth rate in per capita terms is the same. And that's because there was no change in population. Now, normally you're going to have an increase in population, but if there was no change in population, then the growth rates would be the same because you're not controlling for anything because the population didn't increase or decrease. Okay, so that's just why you see that result. Now, I think I probably did it like that just so the math would work out nice, but yeah, that is correct because this 0.32 and this 0.32 were the same, so both growth rates were the same. All right, so for this one, part A, just get the growth rate of real GDP from whatever 2 periods you're looking at. Part B, put them in per capita terms. Just divide the GDP in each year by the population in that year. And then part C, you're going to get just the growth rate of GDP per capita. So stick with this equation, but make sure it's not always going to be 2018, 2019. So just the newer year minus the older year divided by the older year, and the same for here. Okay. All right. So questions on this one, the economic growth, calculating growth rates for GDP per capita. Okay. So number 3 is going to be on the aggregate demand and aggregate supply problem that we had one of these in chapter 13 or something like that. So let's suppose that the AD and AS schedules for a hypothetical economy are shown here. So you can have a table showing real GDP demanded and real GDP supplied, and both at each different price level. Okay, so you can see that at the price levels, when the price level goes down, real GDP demanded goes up, right? So that's just the law of demand. And you can also see that when real GDP or when the price level goes down, the supply goes down as well. So that should make sense because there's a negative relationship here and a positive relationship here, right? All right, so part A is all you're going to do is state the initial equilibrium price and quantity and then draw the little graph. Okay, and remember I did this, and I did this here, and I did this in the previous lecture on Excel. So you can look at my Excel as an example, or if you want, you can just draw this on a piece of graphing paper. So Excel is not required, but if you want to do it in Excel, you can use my example. All right, so this, I think this one here, practice exams, final fall 2020 solutions has the Excel work if you want to see that. Yeah, so there's that one there. So this one. Good. Part A is going to be just state the initial equilibrium and then graph it. So what's the equilibrium price and the equilibrium level of real output in this hypothetical economy? And let's just illustrate this scenario graphically with the ADAS model. All right, so all you have to do for the first part is you can just replicate this chart, or you can see that initially the only price in which supply equals demand is this one here, right? All right, so at price level 140, this is 300, and this is 300, right? At higher prices, this is lower than this, and at lower prices, this is higher than this. So at 140, this is 300, that's 300, that's got to be the initial equilibrium. All right, so there you go. Price level 140. Real GDP supplied is 300. Real GDP demanded is also 300. All right, and then also you either got to draw the graph or you can plot it in Excel like I did. So all we're doing is plotting these points. So you can plot the demand curve by just, this is 1 point, this is another point, and there's 5 points for the demand curve. All right, so 180 and 100, and then 160 and 200. So obviously you see the downward sloping demand curve. So all you're doing is plotting the points and then draw your AD curve. And you're doing the same for the aggregate supply curve. So plot these points. That's 1 point. That's another point. Okay, so these are your points for the supply curve, the AS curve. And so if you plot these points here, you get your demand curve. And all you're doing is plotting the points and drawing a straight line, and the same for the supply curve. Okay, so from the table, there's your AD curve, there's your supply curve, and here's the initial equilibrium. Okay, then for part B, there's going to be a change or a shift in the aggregate demand curve. So let's suppose that buyers desire to purchase 200 billion of extra real output at each price level, which means there's an increase in demand. So what's the new equilibrium price level and level of real output? And let's illustrate this new scenario graphically with the ADAS curve. Okay, so all we're doing is adding 200 billion to each of the initial levels of demand. Okay, so just add 200 to all these and then just repeat the analysis. Okay, so basically demand shifted out. Okay, so 100 plus 200 is 300. 200 plus 200 is 400. So just add 200 to all these and you get 300, 400, 500, 600, 700. So the only difference is these, in which you just added 200 to the initial prices because there was a increase in demand of 200 billion at each price level. Okay, so you should see that because of the increase in demand, the new equilibrium is at a higher price because given the boost in demand, the consumers are on average willing to pay more for goods and services. So now, when you plus 200 to all these, and you get 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, you see that the price which clears the market here is now 160 because now demand is 400, supply is 400, and that's the new equilibrium. So the new equilibrium price level is 160. The new equilibrium level of real output is 400 billion. Okay, and all you have to do for this one is the supply curve, or the AS curve, is the same as before, but the AD curve is shifted out, and if you plot the new points with the plus 200 of demand, you just get these points here, right? So demand shifted out, and you can see that this is the new higher AD prime curve with the new equilibrium here of 400 billion at a price level 160. Okay, part C. In addition to part B, suppose that the amount of real GDP supplied increases by 200 billion. So now there's an increase in supply, or the AS curve. So now, what is the equilibrium price level and the level of real GDP, or real output? And let's illustrate this final this scenario graphically with the AD-AS model. Okay, so this one, we now have the only thing that we have to do is add 200 to each of the supplies, each of the real supplied. So now real GDP supplied increases by 200 billion at each price level. So just add 200 to all of these. So 500 plus 200 is 700. 400 plus 200 is 600. So when you plus 200 to supply now, these are the new higher values at each price level. Okay, so it's just an increase or rightward shift in the AS curve of 200. So now look, so this went out last time, the new AS curve is higher, and we now get a lower price of 140 again, which is the new equilibrium, and the new equilibrium GDP is 500. So when this increases by 200, then you can see that the only price in which they're both the same is 140, in which real GDP demanded is 500 and real GDP supplied is also 500. So you can clearly see there's only going to be one price that clears the market. All right, and then we showed here the rightward shift, or the increase, or the newer AS curve. So this shifted out, see, and just plot these new points, 180, 700, 160, 600, and you get this new curve, the AS prime curve, which is shifted out plus 200. Okay, so for this problem, you're just gonna, and so here's the Excel part. All right, so if you want to do it in Excel, you don't have to, but you can use this as a template. So just kind of list your table here, and then you got to plot this part. This is the demand curve, right? All the GDP is demanded in the prices, and you got to plot the supply curve, which is the priceless and the real GDP supply. Okay, so if you plot all these points, you get this. If you plot all these points, you get this, and then just state the initial equilibrium. Remember, this is the price level, and this is real GDP in billions. And then if you want, you can just plus 200. See, I just told Excel add 200 to all of these. Okay, and then if you plot your new points for your demand curve, you get this. Okay, this is the same. And then part C, something's going to happen to supply. In this case, it increased. So all we did here is I told it to add 200 to all the initial supplies. Okay, so this is your AD prime curve from last time, and then this is the new at these points for your AS prime curve. Okay. All right. So if you want to, if you want to do it in Excel, then you're welcome to use this as a template. Or if it's easier for you, you can just do it on graphing paper or draw it. Whatever's best. Okay. So again, for this question, part A, draw the curves and state the initial equilibrium. Part B, the AD curve is going to increase or decrease. So do that shift and then state the new equilibrium. And then for part C, the AS curve is going to increase or decrease. Do that shift and then find the new equilibrium. Okay. So questions on this one? What to do for the ADS curve question here? All right, so we got two more questions to review for the final. And so the next one, number 4, is on the spending multiplier in fiscal policy, and then number 5 is on monetary policy. Okay. All right. So everybody doing okay so far? Yeah. All right. Number 4 is one very similar to the one everyone did for the chapter. I want to say 13 homework. All right. So if you did the homework for this one, you should be more than prepared for this one. But let's go through this example. Okay. So here's this another example of the spending multiplier in fiscal policy. So assume that hypothetical economy with an MPC of 0.6 is experiencing severe recession. And part A is going to be what do you have to do for government spending? All right, so part A, by how much would government spending have to rise to shift the aggregate demand curve rightward by 150 billion? So first, remember, just use the given equation and take the MPC and calculate the multiplier. Okay, so the multiplier equation is always this, 1 over 1 minus the MPC. So start with that and first just plug in the multiplier there of 0.6, which is given. So 1 over 1 minus 0.6 gives us 1 divided by 0.4, and that's a multiplier of 2.5. All right, so always do this first. Always start with this equation and plug in whatever the MPC is and get the multiplier. All right, that's step 1. Okay, then the next part is given the multiplier, how much would you have to increase government spending to increase the aggregate demand curve by your desired amount? So here's the general equation. The change in government spending times the multiplier equals the change that you want in aggregate demand. Okay, so you're solving for this. Plug in your multiplier of 2.5, and the question said you want to boost aggregate demand by 150. So that's your target. All right, so what times 2.5 is 150? And so the answer here is just 150 divided by 2.5, which is 60. Okay, so in words, government spending would have to all right, so government spending would have to rise by 60 billion to shift the aggregate demand curve rightward by 150 billion. All right, that's part A. Do the fiscal policy with only government spending, and part B is do it with the tax cut. All right, so remember this part. B, how large a tax cut would be needed to achieve the same increase in aggregate demand? So remember, the difference here, or the addition here, well, you can use this equation. It's going to be, you can just use this. But the change in taxes times the multiplier times the MPC equals your target change in aggregate demand. Okay, and so remember, you're putting the MPC here because the tax cut is only as effective as the MPC, because the MPC is 0.6. So the logic here is if consumers get more income due to the tax cut, they're only going to consume 60% of it. The rest of it they're going to save or not spend. So the impact on the economy is only 60% of the new income from tax cuts. So that's why you're multiplying it by 0.6, because only 60% of this new income goes into the economy, and that's how you measure your fiscal policy. Okay, so that goes right there. So the change in the cut in taxes, or the change in taxes times the multiplier times the MPC equals your target change in aggregate demand. Okay, so you get the change in taxes, you're solving for that. The multiplier is 2.5. The MPC was given 0.6, and you're trying to increase or change demand, AD, by 150. So 2.5 times 0.6 is 1.5. Okay, so what times 1.5 is 150? Just divide 150 by 1.5, and you get a change in taxes of 100. Okay, so here a tax cut of 100 billion would be needed to achieve the same increase in aggregate demand of 150 billion. All right, so you can, to increase the aggregate demand curve by 150 billion, you can either do this, you could do this, or you can do some combination of both, which is part C. All right, so C, determine one possible combination of government spending increases and tax decreases that would accomplish the same goal. So break the effect to total 150, but you're going to do part of it with government spending and the rest of it with tax cuts. Okay, so start with this part and do that for the government spending, and then this part for the taxes. Okay, so that's for the government spending part. The rest of it is for the taxes. Okay, so it doesn't matter how you decide to break it up. The only thing that matters is that this and this have to sum to the original amount of 150. So I just broke it in half, 75 and 75, which sum to 150. You don't have to break it in half evenly. You can choose any numbers you want. It's sometimes easier to see how the math works out nicely, but in this case, just dividing it in half works out nice. But know that you're dividing this by 2.5 and this by 1.5. So this comes out nice, but you don't always have to break it directly in half. That's what we did here. Okay. All right, so what change in government spending times the multiplier of 2.5 gives us this part, increasing aggregate demand by 75 billion. Okay, so what times 2.5 is 75? 75 divided by 2.5. So to cover this 75 billion in government spending, you would have to increase government spending by 30. All right, and this part, you're going to do the other 75 with tax cuts. So 2.5 times 0.6 equals 75, and then 2.5 times 0.6 is 1.5. Okay, so what times 1.5 is 75? Just divide 75 by 1.5, and you get that you want to change taxes or cut taxes by 50. Okay, so this is one plan where you do part of it with government spending and the rest of it with tax cuts. So make sure again that whatever you do with government spending plus what you do with tax cuts sums to the original, in this case 150. So one possible combination that would achieve the same goal is here to increase government spending by 30 billion and cut taxes by 50 billion. So you can see that this part of it was covered by government spending. This part of it was covered by taxes. The total, the sum, gives us the 150 we're looking for. Okay, and again, like you did on the homework assignment, there's no right answer here. So some of you chose different numbers to do this, and it's still correct. So as long as this plus this equals 150, you could, this could be 100, this could be 50, as long as this plus this, right? So double check and do this little equation. So that shows you that what you cover with government spending times that multiplier, plus what you cover with taxes times that multiplier equals the sum of the original 150. Okay, so again, we've already had a homework assignment on this exact problem, and I think almost everyone got it 100% correct. So I think we're good here, but questions on this one before we move on to the number 5? All right, so number 5, the last one is going to be on what we learned, some of the stuff we learned from chapter 14 and 15, which was the money and banking stuff, and then monetary policy. So number 5 is on the monetary multiplier and monetary policy. Okay, so here's our example. So Tony Soprano found $10,000 and deposited it into his checking account at Chase Bank. And let's answer the following questions in response to this new $10,000 in checkable deposits. And let's assume the initial reserve ratio is 10%. Okay, so part A, I think we did a problem like this in chapter 14 homework, right? So part A, what is the maximum amount of new loans Chase Bank can make? And this is also called excess reserves, or big E. So excess reserves are what you can lend out in excess of what you have to keep on reserve. Okay, so the reserve ratio is 10%, which means that you have to keep 10% of your reserves, or 10% of your the money in the bank with the Fed, or just keep it on reserve, and you can lend out the other 90%. So 10% of this we can't lend out, which means we can lend out 90% of it. So you can lend out 90% of the 10,000. So excess reserves are 0.90 times 10,000, or $9,000. So you can lend out 90% of the 10,000, which is $9,000. Okay, B, what is the size of the monetary multiplier, little m? So remember that is always 1 divided by the reserve ratio. Okay, so 1 divided by the reserve ratio in decimal terms. The reserve ratio is 10%, so that's 0.10 in decimal. So 1 divided by the reserve ratio is 1 divided by 0.10, which gives us a multiplier, a monetary multiplier of 10. C, calculate maximum checkable deposit creation. So how much new money can be created by this, by lending out these excess reserves. So here, just multiply your excess reserves times the monetary multiplier. So basically E times M, or checkable deposit creation, big D, is excess reserves times the monetary multiplier, because this is the total possible amount of new money that can be created, okay, with this $10,000 deposit. So that's just 9,000 times 10, which is 90,000. Okay, D. Let's answer A, B, and C on the assumption that the reserve ratio is now 12.5%. So the reserve ratio went up, which means that your new money creation should be less, because now the bank, Chase Bank, has to keep more of it on reserve, and they can lend out less. So the money creating potential should be less when you do this part. Okay, so if the bank has to keep 12.5% of reserve, that means they can lend out the other 87.5%. All right, so in decimal terms, the excess 87.5 in decimal terms is 0.875. So multiply that times 10,000, and that means excess reserves are 8,750. Okay, so again, excess reserves just get the excess of what you have, so the remainder of what you have to keep on reserve. So if you have to keep 12.5%, you can lend out the other 87.5%. And here that's 8,750. So to get the multiplier, just divide 1 divided by the reserve ratio. So 1 divided by 12.5% is 1 in decimal terms divided by 0.125%. So make sure you put this in decimal terms, but 12.5% in decimals is 0.125. So 1 divided by 0.125 gives us a multiplier of 8. Okay, monetary multiplier of 8. And finally get the new money possible creation, or the checkable deposit creation, big D, which is again excess reserves times the multiplier. So excess reserves for part D were 8,750. The new monetary multiplier is 8, so 8,750 times 8 gives us possible money creation of 70,000. Okay, so you should see that this is less, it's now lower. The money creating potential is lower because the reserve ratio was increased, which means that the bank can't lend out as much. And the Fed purposely wanted to decrease the money supply here. So they increased the reserve ratio, which is going to lower the monetary multiplier and lower the possible money creation. So anytime the reserve ratio goes up, your new money creation potential should be lower, and vice versa. All right, then part E, the last part, is I added a little section to try to tie this into current events, or to how monetary policy has been used recently. So here we go, part E. So during the 2007-2009 recession, in addition to conventional open market operations, the Federal Reserve announced that it would buy mortgage-backed securities as a monetary policy tool. And there's a little web link here. So briefly explain, we did this in the chapter 15 homework. So briefly explain the cause-effect chain from this specific expansionary monetary policy. In other words, the Fed buying mortgage-backed securities, and how it boosted real GDP in the U.S. economy. All right, so Let's see if this web link still works. All right, there you go. So the Fed realized that these were extraordinary times, and they had to do something different as a monetary policy tool because mortgage-backed securities were the main cause of this crisis. So here, the Fed. I'm just showing you what the announcement. The Fed announced it would initiate a program to purchase the obligations of the mortgage-backed securities by some of the big banks. All right, so this asset was undesirable at the time because a lot of mortgages weren't being paid, and so the Fed decided to buy these assets and keep them for later until the market was stable again. Okay, so all you gotta do here is you can write the equation for GDP if you want. All right, so uh, in monetary policy, the Fed is trying to influence private investment, which is going to influence GDP. Okay, so in theory, this uh, policy is going to increase this, which is going to increase this, right? All right, so I wrote a little synopsis, and you can when you do this on your exam, you can do something similar, but just make sure it ties into the specific example. So here we go. All right, so as a monetary policy action, the Fed is buying mortgage-backed securities. So here's what happens. So the Fed is buying mortgage-backed securities is essentially a form of quantitative easing, which we learned about. So that's just doing quantitative easing is doing something untraditional and buying, basically doing open market operations in unconventional ways. All right. So here, the Fed bought mortgage-backed securities from banks and the public. What this did, in theory, is put more money in the banking sector because the banking sector didn't want those things anymore because they were undesirable. So the Fed bought them, and the banks got money from the Fed. So this put more money in the banking sector because the Fed is essentially holding the financial asset, the MBS, as collateral, and banks receive the inflow of money from the Fed, which gets infused back into the economy via lending, right? So the Fed buys the mortgage-backed securities. The banks get the money to lend out to the banking sector. Okay, so note that especially during the financial crisis, the MBS was a riskier asset than the Fed typically pursues. However, given the nature of the crisis and historically low interest rates, the Fed had to turn to more creative monetary policy tools. All right, so here's what happens. So this part is basically what's going to happen in your exam question as well. So the cause effect chain was here as follows. Okay. So the Fed increased bank reserves. All right, so the big banks desperately needed liquid assets by buying more mortgage-backed securities. So the Fed gave the banks more money to lend out by buying their mortgage-backed securities that they had. As a result, banks can make more loans to the private sector at lower interest rates. The prime interest rate fell. And then this, by definition, would boost private investment because when interest rates fall, it's cheaper to borrow for businesses to make business investments. And this increased this, which led to a rightward expansionary shift of the AD curve. Okay, so this increased, and so then in theory, the economy would move to a new higher equilibrium level of real GDP. Okay, so there's a lot going on here, but you're basically using the cause effect chain that we learned in chapter 15 in your chapter 15 homework and applying it to a specific different policy the Fed took in the current or the 2007, 2009 crises. And then on your exam, I put in a different one for the current recession. Okay, so your analysis it'll be similar to this, but just a little bit different based on the specific example that the Fed is using. Okay, but you're going to do this. You're going to start with this equation. You're going to explain what the Fed's doing here, and then how that's going to have this cause-effect chain, just like we learned in chapter 15. All right, so for number 5, I think we're good on what's A through D. We had the chapter 14 homework was similar to this, and almost everyone got it 100% correct, so I think we're good here. For part E, questions on what we did here, and just so on your exam, you're just going to take a different example, start with this, and just explain the cause-effect chain that relates to that example. But you can use this example to kind of and just change the example. So for part E, questions on what I want you to do here for the cause-effect chain. Okay. All right. So that's the review for the practice final exam questions. So next I'll post the final exam, and I'll post the extra credit questions. Any questions on this before we do that? All right, so let me post the final exam. We'll go through that real quick, and let me post the extra credit questions as well, and we'll go through that, and then yeah. So give me a second here, and I'll post them to Blackboard. Okay, so here we go. So it should be posted. So if you go to the final exam fall 2020, and you should see that I posted a PDF and a Word document of your final. So it's the same thing. You can open the PDF or the Word document, and then we got some extra credit questions. So first, let's just run through the exam. So here's the PDF. All right, so here's your final, same deal, 5 questions. And so it's got instructions, but you know what to do here. So you want to email your answer sheet to me by next Wednesday, week 16, finals week, Wednesday, December 16th, which is next Wednesday. All right, so you can prepare your answer sheet as a PDF or a Word document and send me an email of that. All right, so this should be similar to what we just went through, and you should have good examples there. So number 1, you're going to calculate real GDP. So you're going to get the price index based on the question, the nominal GDP and the real GDP, right? So just do this part, and this part. Okay. Number two, you're going to calculate economic growth based on the change from one year to the next. And then you're going to get growth rate of GDPs based on the GDPs and the population, and then the growth rate of real GDP per capita. Number three, you're going to do the aggregate demand and aggregate supply model. So here's the chart. Graph the curves, show the initial equilibrium, and then part B, demand's going to shift, what happens, and then part C, supply is going to shift, show that shift, and then the new equilibrium here. And again, for this one, you can use my example in Excel to do it in Excel, or you can just do it on graphing paper. You don't have to do it in Excel. Okay, number four, I'm pretty sure everyone's good on. You got the MPC. You're going to do the government spending part of fiscal policy, then the tax cut part, and then some combination of both. All right, and then number five. Okay, you got an example of a new deposit, the initial reserve ratio. So calculate, like we've done, excess reserves, the monetary multiplier, and checkable deposit creation, and then do it when the reserve ratio changes. In this case, it goes from 8% to 5%. Okay, and then part E, this is the new part that I tried to tie in something to current events. And so let me just read part E. Okay, and you can do it similar to what I showed you for the part E in the practice. And so I'm not going to grade this too critically, but I thought it was nice to have something that related to current events. So part E. In response to the economic shutdown caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Federal Reserve's new corporate credit facility took in $305 million worth of exchange-traded funds on the first day of its operation, according to data released Thursday. So this was in March or April 2000. Okay, so let's click on this. All right, so there you go. If you click on that, that'll show the announcement where the Fed bought $305 million worth of corporate debt bonds. Okay, and then all you got to do here is explain the cause-effect change, similar to what we did in the example from the practice. So briefly explain the cause-effect chain from this specific expansionary monetary policy tool, the Fed buying corporate debt ETFs, and how the Fed expects this action to boost real GDP in the U.S. economy. And so this is again another form of quantitative easing where the Fed is doing something different because the traditional open market operations were not working, and the Fed had to try something more creative. So the Fed did this specifically in response to the initial stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. And what they did is, even you don't really have to know what corporate debt ETFs are, exchange traded funds, but the little article explains it. And what they're doing is basically buying a bundle of funds of stocks from the banks, and they're trying to get money into big corporations because, especially in the initial stages of the pandemic, a lot of big corporations were worried about liquidity, and so this was just another untraditional way for the Fed to buy the asset and give the banks, or in this case, the corporations, more liquidity. All right, so but basically the cause effect chain is going to be similar. Something's going to happen, and it's going to boost. It's going to boost private investment. That's going to boost aggregate demand, and you're going to get that rightward shift in the ADAS curve. So start with that. and just try to briefly explain the cause-effect chain here. Okay, so questions on the final exam? Okay, so let's if we're good on the final exam, let's look at the so I made a couple more extra credit questions. All right, so these are extra credit questions. And so last time I had some extra credit for after with midterm two, I think only I want to say 3 students did it. So I tried to see if I increase the points, maybe some more students will do it. We'll see. But last time was worth 10 points, and I think everyone that did it got those 10 points. But to increase participation, I'm making it now 15 points. So if you do this extra credit, you can get up to 15 exam points, and that applies to all the exams. So it can't hurt to do it because you can apply your 15 points to all the exams that you've done. And so it's likely that you can use those 15 points. Okay. So if you want to do this, you can submit your answer sheet with your final or before or after, whatever. But the extra credit is due the same day as the final, which is next Wednesday, December 16th, via email. Okay, so there's not too complicated, but I tried to make a couple more questions that are related to current events. And so here, number 1 is on the business cycle. And so in chapter 11, we discussed the types of goods that are affected most by the business cycle, which were durable goods. And we also discussed the types of goods that are somewhat insulated and not affected as much from the most severe effects of recession, which were non-durable goods and services. Okay, so part A is on durable goods. So I have a little link to just the data on durable goods. So if you could just look on the historical data, just click on the link. And the question is, in March, April, the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, what happened to consumer spending on durable goods? Initially, did it increase or decrease? And then the last piece, the most recent observation is October 2020. So in October 2020, had consumer spending on durable goods fully recovered. All right, so all you have to do here is click on the little link, and it takes you to the Fred data page for durable goods spending. And so basically, initially what happened, did it increase or decrease, and then has it recovered? So that's it. And then do the same for non-durable goods. Okay, so examine the historical data for non-durable goods, and in March, April, the beginning of the pandemic, what happened to consumer spending on non-durable goods? Did it increase or decrease? And then as of October 2020, had consumer spending on non-durable goods fully recovered? Okay. And then C, this is the key here, on services. So examine the historical data for services. In March, April, the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, what happened to consumer spending on services? Did they go up or down? And has spending on consumer services as of October 2020, have they fully recovered? Okay, and then D, regarding consumption spending on services from part C, is you're finding contradictory to what we learned in chapter 11, and why do you think this is the case? Okay, so it's a little wordy, but it's pretty much just like a few short answers. So initially, what happened to all these three things? You'll probably see that it's pretty clear that they all went down initially, and most of these recovered, but the question leads you to the one that didn't, and so you'll see that that's a little bit different than what we normally thought happened in the business cycle, given the specific nature of the current pandemic. So this is it's kind of a fun question because it looks at something that's happening uniquely now and how it relates to specifically services. Okay, so if you want to do that one, just click on the links and answer the quick questions. All right, and then number 2 for extra credit is to look at the M1 and M2 data. So in chapter 14, we learned that M1 is equal to currency plus check pull deposits. And we also learned that M2 is equal to M1 plus near monies. So if you look at the data for M1, since March, April, the beginning of the pandemic, what has happened to M1? So it'll be clear that what's happened to M1 if you look at that since March, April. Same for M2. Look at the historical data. What's clearly happened to M2 since March, April? Okay, and you'll clearly. I think I showed you this in class, but when you look at the more recent trends, what might explain what you see in these trends in M1 and M2 since March, April? And D, what economic problem or concept from chapter 15 that we discussed last time do we see here? Okay, so there's one thing we talked about in the chapter 15 study guide that you can clearly see in the data. And why is this an issue for monetary policy going forward? Okay, so here's the extra credit questions if you want to do these for 15 exam points. And so I thought they were kind of fun because you can see, you can look at actual data right now and answer questions specifically that relate to macroeconomics. So you don't have to get this 100%. I mean, there's no 100% right answer, but if you give it a good attempt, I'm trying to give you 15 points. So I think this shouldn't take you too long if you want to attempt these. Maybe 15 minutes per question shouldn't take too long. Okay, so there's that. All right, so if you want to do the extra credit, it can't hurt. You can get up to 15 points on any exam, and it's kind of fun to see some current events and how that relates to what's actually going on right now. So here's that. Okay. All right, so questions on the extra credit questions? All right, so yeah, try to give those an attempt if you have some time, and I think they're kind of fun and they relate to current events. So there's that. I'm not going to grade these too difficultly. So again, as long as you make a good attempt, I'm trying to give you 15 points of extra credit. So try that if you have time. All right, so here's your extra credit. All right, so final exam is due in a week next Wednesday. You can email it to me before or whenever you finish it. And then the extra credits also due next Wednesday if you want to do that. Okay, and then also last homework. The chapter 15 homework is due today, so make sure you get that in when you have time there. Okay. Okay, I think that might be about it for the semester. So we've got you got your last homework, you got your final, and you got the extra credit, which we do via email next Wednesday. I'll try to have your grades in depending on when all the exams are submitted, but by the very least, I'll try to get them in late next week, and definitely by next weekend. And so I'll send everyone an email once I get everything graded, and you can see once I send you an email, you'll be able to see your unofficial grades on Blackboard. All right. So anything else? Everyone good on finishing up the homework, the midterm, extra credit? Anything else? Okay, so you guys are all welcome, and all right. So I think that's it. We finished the semester and everything I wanted to cover. So hopefully you learned something about economics. But let me know if you have any questions. I think that's gonna wrap it up, and everyone stay safe, and I'll look forward to seeing your exams.
Thanks, Professor. Good night.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.